Cyclical and linear time. Two aspects of time have already been touched upon: its irreversible linear character and its circular aspect. The latter conception seems to be prevalent in almost all ancient cultures and is presumably based on the observation of the regular circular motion of these celestial bodies and the changing of the seasons. The circular flow of Oceanus and the snake biting its own tail with the zodiac allude to this. Kronos was even directly called the round element, the giver of time. Macrobius writes, insofar as time is a fixed measure, it originates from the movement of the heavens. In it time began, and from it supposedly came Kronos, who was Kronos time. This Kronos is the creator of time. Indian culture was dominated by a cyclical conception of time. There the unit of time was an age, a yuga, 1,080,000 years. A complete cycle, Maha Yuga, consists of 4 yugas, 4 signifying wholeness and completion. In each cycle, the first yuga is a golden age, then each subsequent one is of a lower quality until the great revelation, and then the same cycle begins again. The names of the yugas were determined by dice. A Maha Yuga consists of 12,000 divine years, each containing 360 ordinary years, that is, 4,320,000 years. Thousands of Maha Yugas form a Kalpa form, which represents a day in the life of Brahma. Time is thus a cosmic rhythm of periodic destruction and recreation of the universe. For humans, this cycle of time, viewed negatively, leads to samsara, the eternally turning wheel of birth and death, of endless reincarnations. Only the Yuga or Buddhist who has experienced Brahman or the Buddhist spirit in a flash of enlightenment can escape this cycle. He overcomes the interplay of opposites and ceases all processes of memory and thought forever. Mircea Eliade had demonstrated that a slightly different myth of eternal recurrence was also alive in many other cultures. In the still timeless moment of creation, which he calls Illud Tempus, that time, the archetypal prototypes of all things and human actions were first created. Their earthly imitations, however, are subject to decay. Human beings can renew the archetypal prototypes and restore their own way of life by retelling the creation myths and repeating the rituals. Thus, for us too, Easter is not only the festival of Christian resurrection, but of a renewal of all creation. However, for us, the idea of Illud Tempus has been partially internalized. Paradise, the heavenly kingdom, is within us and can be reached at any time through metanoia, a change of consciousness. The Chinese also recognized a primordial time, Illud Tempus, in which cultural heroes created all the orders of life. China possessed a cyclical conception of time and a linear one, which will be discussed later. The idea of time, as it underlies the oldest book of changes, the Qing, was represented in 2 circular time models, time mandalas. One was called the primordial heavenly order, a circle formed from the 8 kuas, the fundamental principles of all being. Yang, the creative principle, heaven, Qian, was associated in the north. Yin, the receptive principle, earth, Kun, in the north. The whole was arranged as shown in the accompanying illustration. This system is in a sense timeless, though not without movement. In the primeval order of heavens, Richard Willem wrote, the forces always act in paired opposite. Thunder awakens the seeds of the old year. Its opposite, the wind, melts the rigidity of the winter ice. Rain moistens the seeds. Its opposite, the sun, adds the necessary warmth. Hence the saying, water and fire do not fight. Stillness inhibits further expansion. Its opposite, serenity, brings about the joys of the harvest. The creative, which represents the great law of existence, and the receptive, which shows the nurturing in the womb into which everything returns after completing the cycle of life. Here opposites do not clash, they balance each other. Furthermore, the pre-earthly celestial order was associated with a numerical mandala, the Hotu. This movement is repeated externally within the framework of this order. According to tradition, King Wen and the Duke of Zhou, imprisoned by the tyrant Zhou Xin around 1150 BC, discovered a new order of time which was called the Later or Imminent Celestial Order. In it, Li, fire, is located in the south instead of Qian, of the sky, and Kan, water, in the north instead of Kum, of the receiving. The trigrams are no longer grouped as opposing pairs, but are presented in the chronological order as they manifest in the annual cycle in earthly reality. It symbolizes God's work in nature. The older order emphasizes duration, the younger one movement. Both, however, are circular. The younger order was also associated with the number mandala, the low shu, order of the low flow. This was considered the fundamental number pattern of the universe. It is a magic square in which all rows and diagonals add up to 15. The Chinese based their architecture, their music, even their menus on this pattern. Of course, the Chinese also had an astrological time system similar to ours. However, their zodiac contains different figures, and the signs represent years, not months, as with us. The calendars of the Maya and Aztec show similarities to that of the Chinese. The Maya viewed time not only as a deity, the sun god, but each year, each month, day, and even each hour was identical with a number and a god. The same was true for the Aztecs, although time existing from the beginning as a potential manifestation of the highest god, the Lord of Time, it only became apparent after the creation of the four Tezcatlipoca. After a period of equilibrium similar to the balance of opposites in the ancient Chinese celestial order, each of the Tezcatlipoca wanted to become the sun. Thus, conflict and change arose, leading to a linear conception of time that developed in 5 successive suns. The 4 tigers lasted 676 years. Then the humans were eaten by ocelots, and the sun was destroyed. Then came the sun, 4 winds, in whose final days everything was blown away by the wind and the people became like apes. Next came the sun, 4 rain, at the end of which everything burned and people became like turkeys. Finally, the sun of our time, movement, reigned. In this time there will be earthquakes and famine, and so will our end come, as the Leyenda de las Sols says. The Aztecs believed that the days worked as they moved across the sky. The time gods were depicted as figures carrying a sum of days, months, or years on their backs, following one another in an immense circle. Interestingly, the Greek poet Hesiod also refers to the hours as daimons, gods. Our astrological system also consists of a circular procession of divine images. It originates from Mesopotamia around 600 BC, but also shows later Egyptian influences. The zodiac signs were originally different from those of today. They were initially earthly tribal gods that were then projected onto the constellations when the Babylonians began to observe the movements of the stars and record them in numerical values. In this way, they discovered a regular order in this procession of gods, or archetypes, an order that could be expressed through numbers. Jung defines number as an archetype of order made conscious. The time gods of the Aztecs and Maya were also numbers, and the Chinese likewise associated the celestial order with numbers. Their word for calculation, shi, is written like this. The upper horizontal lines represent the heavens, the 3 vertical ones the influence of the sun, moon, and stars on the earth. Calculation was closely linked to the fortune telling in China. The Babylonian new scientific religion spread to Persia and Egypt, where the gods were partially replaced by native gods. The Babylonians believed in the eternity of the world and in Hammamina, a certain providence that reigned in the cosmos. All things on earth have their correspondence in heavenly events. In periods of 4,320,000 years, all the heavens return to the initial constellation, as in the Indian myth of eternal recurrence. These ideas also influenced the Greeks from Thales of Miletus onward, and inspired Plato's cosmological model of time. Above and beyond the phenomenal world exist Platonic ideas, which form a unity around the idea of the good. However, when the creator, Demiurge, created the world, he could not simultaneously transfer this model in its entirety into the transient world. As the archetype is an eternal living being, so he set about shaping this universe into one as well. Now the nature of the living being was eternal, and transferring this to what had come into being was not possible. He therefore decided to create a moving image of eternity, and in doing so simultaneously gave the structure of the universe its inner order, formed an eternal image of eternity which persists in unity and moves according to number, precisely what we have called time, ion. Ion here means ionic time, which lies between the timeless world of ideas and the time-bound transient reality. It consists of long historical eons. Ion exists forever. It is the fixed star sphere considered eternal, which knows no suffering or change and moves in an eternal circle. Only under the moon does the world of Kronos begin, the fleeting and transient sublunar world of decay. The cyclical idea of time is still taken seriously by physicists today in the form of the so-called ergodic hypothesis. This states that regardless of the state of the finite universe, is it at a given time, it will eventually return to its initial state, passing through all other possible states in a predetermined sequence. However, current hypotheses about the life of the cosmos are very diverse. Both proponents believe that our universe began with a Big Bang, an explosion, and is expanding towards its heat death. Other scientists believe in a stable state of the universe, in which matter is constantly created and destroyed, without any discernible beginning or end. Certainly not for reasons of reason, but because of that primal intuition of cyclical time, we first built clocks in a circular shape. Even today, clock faces are mostly round, thus reflecting the celestial order. The oldest clocks are the gnomon and the sundial, both of which utilize the apparent rotation of the sun around the earth by measuring time through the changes in the shadow cast by a rod, column, or obelisk, or in the case of the sundial, by tracking its change in position. The gnomon probably arrived in Greece in the 6th century BC. It had the disadvantage of only being able to indicate local time. Furthermore, the movement of the sun around the earth is very complex. By tilting the rod parallel to the earth's actual rotation, this could be simplified. Now, at a given location, the direction of the shadow was the same at the same time every day, only its length remained variable. This type of sundial was in use in Egypt from the 13th century BC, but was probably known to the Babylonians even earlier. Until the 17th century, the sundial remained more accurate than any mechanical clock. The invention of the latter depended on a crucial advancement, the invention of the gear in the time of Archimedes. It likely arose from attempts to model calendar cycles. Little is known about this until the 9th century, when gears were already complex ratios appeared in astrolabes, star altimeters in Arab countries, evidently the ancestors of our clocks. From these beginnings, the mechanical clock slowly developed. All the various mechanisms share four basic components, invented at different times: a drive mechanism, initially a weight, later a spring, an oscillating regulator, pendulum, today usually an electromagnet that compensates for differences in temperature, pressure, and material, an escapement that counteracts energy lost due to friction, and a dial that indicates hours, minutes, etc. Despite all these manifestations of a circular conception of time, the idea of a linear, irreversible sequence of time also existed originally. It is likely based on the observation of the aging of all living beings and the profound changes in life brought about by historical events. Despite their circular models of time, the Chinese, for example, recorded historical data for over 3 millennia to understand how one should behave in the present and in the future, how love, yin, and righteousness, yi, lead to beneficial, and evil deeds to unfavorable social conditions. They therefore believed in the possibility of ethical improvement and social evolution. The Aztec myth of the five suns also lends historical time a linear aspect, but one that leads not to development but to ultimate destruction. Long before humankind understood the cause of aging, because some body cells are no longer renewed, while others are renewed much more slowly, time was associated with decay, death, and even evil in many religions. The Hellenistic aeon was, as mentioned, also Kronos, the primordial god, later supplanted by Zeus, who devoured his own children. This concept of time as the all-devourer lived on in Christianity in the figure of Father Time, who embodies the characteristic of Cronus, Saturn, and death. The 16th and 17th centuries revelled in macabre depictions of deadly time. The Judeo-Christian tradition primarily recognizes a linear concept of time. It is based on the possible direct intervention of God in history, on his providence and his plan of salvation, to lead humanity to perfection and ultimately to abolish the world. This older Christian conception of time, however, is not a mathematical parameter. It includes certain cyclical features as well as a divine plan, a teleological linearity of time, in which the 7 days of creation repeat themselves. In the Old Testament, certain typoi, the archetypes of certain events, are found that recur more clearly in the New Testament. For example, the tree of knowledge in paradise is made of the same wood as the staff of Moses, and also the beam in Solomon's temple. Finally, the cross of Christ was also made from this wood. Such an eternally cyclical motive was combined with the linear flow of time. Despite the emphasis on the fact that Christ died only once for us, some church believed in astral influences and a certain cyclical nature of history. The Illud Tempus idea of supernatural archetypes of being is also found in Christianity in the concept of the unus mundus as the plan of the universe that God conceived in his mind before creation. He was also understood as the personified wisdom of God, the sapientia Dei. Certain archetypes, ideas, or patterns together form the archetypus mundus, or the model, exemplar in the mind of God. It contained a mathematical order, with the ma belonging to the Father, the number to the Son, and the weight to the Holy Spirit. Although the typoi repeat themselves throughout history, they follow a linear development insofar as they increasingly clarify the Godhead and his plan for salvation. What shone forth in the Old Testament shines forth in full glory in the New Testament. Abbot Gioacchino da Fiore, 12th century, created one of the best-known doctrines of such historical correspondence. According to the Trinity, he divided the passage of time into these 3 great eras: the times of the Old Testament, that of the Father, in which the law and its literal interpretation of the Bible reigned; the first Christian millennium, the time of the Son, in which the obedience to the Church and wisdom dominated; finally, the present millennium of the Holy Spirit, in which the spiritual people will live in poverty but in complete freedom, following the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. The idea that God had a timeless plan for the world in his mind before it was materially realized aligns with the sacramental view of history held by Christians. It also recalls Plato's concept that all earthly things are based on primal forms, the ideas. As C. Haber has demonstrated in the 15th century, the clock was seen as a representation of such a divine plan. Around 1453, Nicholas of Cusa wrote his Visud Dei. Let us consider the idea of the clock as a representation of eternity. Eternity for eternity gathers and unfolds the sequence of time, just as the clock gathers and unfolds events. Gradually, however, the clock as a symbol lost its sacramental character until, in the 18th century, it became the image of an automate that no longer had any connection with God. In physics, the breakthrough to the purely mathematical concept of linear time was achieved by Newton, who represented measurable time with a geometric line. His role was then superseded by the second law of thermodynamics, formulated by Carnot and Boltzmann. The latter states that in every physical process, a certain quantity of energy is irretrievably lost in the form of heat. Consequently, disorder, entropy increases and leads to the death of our universe. The law gives rise to the concept of an hour of time and irreversible directionality of time. Today, however, many physicists believe that the mind, unlike nature, is a negotropic factor, that it can generate order from disorder and systems of higher energy potential. This led Olivier Costa de Beauregard to postulate the existence of a cosmic infrapsychism, a kind of world soul which would coexist with Einstein's universe and be a source of universal negentropy. In contemporary physics, however, the hour of time generally prevails as a metaphor. The Western preference for the idea of an hour of time was further fueled by Charles Darwin's discoveries. Darwin viewed the evolution of species on Earth as purely mechanical, driven by chance. Thus for him too, time is a straight line. Although some vitalists deny this view, it is still widely accepted. Finally, the perceptible psychological changes that humans experience in their lives also support the idea of an hour of time. Attempts have repeatedly been made to reconcile the linear and cyclical use of time. Augustine's interpretation of time and eternity represents one such attempt, and the Chinese conception of history linked the circular form of time with the idea of a linear moral development of humanity based on historical experience. Perhaps the best image for such a combination is that of the spiral. Jung attempted to demonstrate that such a spiral-shaped process exists within the self, the inner image of God in man. In the development of this God-man image, as seen in the Book of Enoch by the Gnostics and by certain Western alchemists, the self was initially considered a divine Adam and later a lower earthly Adam after the fall. If we unwind the adjacent chain spirally, we obtain the lower image at the highest point. The rotundum represents a slightly higher level of consciousness than the first anthropos. According to Jung, this model is consistent with the main line of development of our idea of God. The lowest counterpoint is the serpent, which caused Adam's fall and corresponds to the divine primordial matter, the goal of the alchemists. After its circulation through the four elements, it becomes the philosopher's stone, a new symbol of God-man. The latter is then presented in the form of the round as the fundamental element of the universe. Between these 2 points lie 4 times 4 centers, forming an upper and a lower quaternion, the 4 streams of paradise, and the 4 elements. These quaternions were understood as an unfolding of the center above. Human beings were initially like children, dependent on the spiritual sphere. This sphere was threatened by Satan, the dark principle, and by the shadow of human instinct. Christ shattered the gates of hell, but did not return as he had promised. The idea of a quaternary and the philosopher's stone coincides chronologically with the development of the natural sciences. Alchemical speculations led to the concept of 4 states of matter, to the model of a 4-dimensional timescale, and finally to various modern quaternary models of the subatomic world. The series concludes with the circle, the archetypal idea of rotation, which transcends even such a static quaternary. The circle, on a higher plane, merges once again with the spiritual Adam. This model of the self could be represented in an equation as shown here, where we denote the initial state, here the anthropos by A, the final state by A7, the immediate states by B, C, D. We denote their respective splitting figures with the corresponding lower letters A, B, C, D. Regarding the construction of the formula, we must keep in mind the fact that it concerns the progressive transformation process of one and the same substance. This substance and its respective state of transformation will each produce its similar counterpart. That is, from A will emerge A, and from B, B. Likewise, B will produce B, and C, C. Likewise, it is assumed that A is followed by B, and that the formula is written from left to right. These assumptions are legitimate for a psychological formula. What the formula can only suggest is the higher level that is reached through the transformation process. The change in quality consists of a 4-part or 4-fold unfolding of the whole, which means nothing other than its becoming conscious. Jung compares this spiral process to this in the self-image of God, to the self-renewal of the carbon nucleus in the solar carbon-nitrogen cycle, in which a carbon nucleus captures 4 protons and at the end of the cycle releases them again in the form of alpha particles in the order to return to its original structure. The physical analogy is not a digression insofar as the symbolic scheme itself represents a descent into matter and demands the identity of the outside with the inside. Psyche cannot be wholly other than matter, for how then could it move matter? And matter cannot be alien to psyche, for how then could it generate it? Psyche and matter are in one and the same world, and each participates in the other. Otherwise, interaction would be impossible. Therefore, if research can only progress far enough, one should arrive at an ultimate agreement between physical and psychological concepts. Our current attempts may be daring, but I believe they are on the right track. Mathematics, for example, has proven more than once that its purely logical constructs beyond all experience have subsequently been shown to coincide with the behavior of things, which, like synchronistic events, points to a profound correspondence of a form of being. Jung's symbolic spiral model attempts to represent a basic structure of physical and psychological life. Interestingly, the Melanesian marriage system, which aims to perpetuate the flow of life through a system of reciprocal marriages between two clans, one matrilineal and one patrilineal, yields two types of spirals, a closed matrilineal lifeline and a broken spiral, representing masculine power. And last but not least, the genetic material of all living things is coiled in a double helix, as Watson, Crick, and Wilkins have demonstrated. Perhaps this genetic helix represents an analogy to the archetypal conception of time as a helix, in which the cyclical and linear aspects appear reconciled.